Hey there, welcome to Just the News. I am Carrie Sheffield. We've got a great author for you for our Just the Book segment. China is a very hot button issue right now. We've been bringing you lots of coverage, and we've got an expert author here to unpack the latest China trends and perhaps let you know some things that you might not have known before about how to think about China. So, welcome to our author. His name is Mr. David P. Goldman. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Thanks for the invitation.
So, David, your book is titled You Will Be Assimilated, China's Plan to Sinoform the World. Not a very subtle title there. What is Sinoform? What does this mean to Sinoform the world?
China wants to turn most of the world into satrapies of China, make the rest of us the tenant farmers, and it wants to do that by controlling what it calls the fourth industrial revolution, powered by artificial intelligence and fast mobile broadband. And it's very advanced in its plans, and this would portend a much poorer and less secure and less happy America.
So, David, why did you write this book then? What's the biggest takeaway that you want the reader specifically to know?
I wrote the book because although I think President Trump deserves credit for calling attention to our problems with China, we have underestimated the nature of China's intentions, and we haven't done the kinds of things that we need to do to remain the top superpower in the world. We're losing ground, and I'm alarmed about it, so I want to alarm you and your listeners.
And so, what do you want listeners, what do you want Americans to do?
Well, back when I was a very young man and did a bit of consulting for the National Security Council, the United States was the wonder of the world. We had a massive amount of federal subsidies going through the Defense Department to corporate labs, and we invented every technology that went into the digital world, including the internet and telecommunications that we're using right now. The fast light microchip, lasers, optical networks, uh, displays, the internet itself. And in those days, we were a magnet for talent. We crushed the Soviet Empire by out innovating them, by making it clear to them they couldn't keep up with us in the civilian economy and they couldn't beat us in military technology. And now China is trying to position itself to do exactly the same thing to us through massive investments in new technologies which will transform the world in the 21st century.
So, people said the same thing about Japan when we're talking about the 80s and 90s era, and yet that certainly didn't happen. Demographically, Japan had a number of challenges. That China seems to be having some demographic challenges as well as a number of internal issues, not only around demographics, but also around governance. And even just the overall integrity of the community or the economy and how people trust data coming out of China. I mean, do you actually think that China is a much bigger threat than Japan was in the previous era?
Well, there's several reasons why Japan and China really aren't comparable. First of all, Japan is roughly 10 times, China is roughly 10 times the size of Japan. Secondly, Japan never had ambitions to be a dominant world power, at least not after we crushed them in World War II. And third, the Japanese made a decision to maintain a great deal of their economy in a very inefficient status, small business, small farms, and so forth, for social reasons, whereas the Chinese have uprooted 600 million people in the past 35 years, the equivalent of the entire population of Europe from the Ural Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean, moved them to the cities and undertaken an economic transformation which is unique in the history of the world. If you look at the Chinese official numbers, per capita consumption has risen ninefold in the past 30 years. And if you walk around Chinese cities, places that used to be third world backwaters and slums now look like science fiction movie sets. And I urge your listeners to go onto YouTube and just look at an aerial view of cities like Chengdu or Chongqing or Hefei or Wuhan. Well, Wuhan you've heard of, most of the other Chinese cities you haven't, and look at what they've become. If you talk
Well,
to
and it's
Chinese,
interesting. You've made the point that the argument that for a lot of Americans, again, I'm using this word, but my interpretation is that you're saying that Americans were kind of asleep at the wheel, or just not understanding, miscalculating how China is an innovative place. That the sort of old story is that China is not that innovative, and all they resort to is intellectual property theft. They're not that creative because it's a command and control economy. We shouldn't see them as a threat. Why was that kind of sclerosis so common, and what are you hoping will shake us out of that?
well, Westerners have underestimated Asians since the Russians got crushed by the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, and since the British were overrun at Singapore by the Japanese in 1942, and the French by the Vietnamese in Dien Bien Phu, and so forth. In this case, we misunderstand how China innovates. Huawei, for example, is a unique phenomenon in the 5,000-year history of the Chinese empire. In my book, You Will Be Assimilated, I interviewed the chief technology officer of Huawei. He happens to be an Australian, plays mean jazz guitar. He has 50,000 foreign employees, and they're doing most of the basic research and development. China is not only doing its homegrown R&D, the Chinese empire is assimilating, like the Borg, vast amounts of scientific and engineering talent from around the world for the first time in its history. They bankrupt their competitors and hire their talent on a massive scale.
So, in terms of the forward looking at this, I spoke at the White House with a member of the administration on the issue of 5G, because 5G is a topic that you touch on quite a bit in your book. And he actually said, from his perspective, he works on a lot of innovation initiatives within the administration, that the focus for the United States is really to go on offense and actually focus on 6G. And to quit with the hand wringing and to really be forward looking in that respect. Have you spoken with members of the administration about your book and about these issues?
Yes, many times. The administration first tried to get Cisco to buy Ericsson and create a national champion that would contend with Huawei. And as the Wall Street Journal reported a few weeks ago, Cisco said, we're not in the business of buying low margin, low return on equity businesses. So as a default, the administration has gone with what's called the software approach. There's a corporate coalition called ORAN, which says, don't worry about 5G and the dedicated technology which powers it, because we can write code which will sit on top of cheap generic computer components and do the same thing better. Many industry people I know, old semiconductor hands, don't think this will work particularly well. And the problem is, even if it does work, 5G is only the catalyst for the fourth industrial revolution. It's not the bearer of it ourselves. When we think about mobile broadband, Carrie, we think about how fast it's going to take us to download a movie on our smartphone. The Chinese are thinking about what mobile broadband means for the Internet of Things, for industrial robots that talk to each other and use artificial intelligence to devise new production processes, for autonomous vehicles, for telemedicine, including remote robotic surgery, things that we couldn't have imagined a few years ago. And it's the whole complex of technologies that are born by 5G that make it such an important technology. It's like the railroads in the 19th century. The
Sure,
railroad,
all those things that you mentioned are certainly things that U.S. researchers are absolutely at the forefront of their mind as well. But is your argument that it's just not pervasive enough more broadly within U.S. culture, sort of within our cultural imagination? Is that really what your concern
oh
is?
no, it's definitely in our imagination, but our tech companies in the past 20 years made a very clear decision to move out of manufacturing. And the latest and most alarming example of that is Intel, which announced last week that it probably would get out of the business of chip fabricating entirely, when it used to dominate that industry, and send it overseas to Taiwan and so forth. If we're not producing the physical manufacturing processes We're not doing the robotic manufacturing. We're not doing the autonomous vehicles. We're not doing the telemedicine and so forth. And all of the productivity gains that are associated with this 5G technology will go to places where they are being fostered. The Chinese National People's Congress just announced a $2.2 trillion program over 5 years to develop these new technologies. If you talk to the guys at Huawei, they'll tell you, even if we didn't do the 5G, it's the spin-offs that really are going to make us the dominant company in the world, give us the control points.
Sure. So, but in terms of, again, this issue of 6G, or sort of trying to look even forward, that's what the Trump White House said to Just the News, that they're more interested in really going on offense compared to defense. Do you find that the Trump administration, do you agree with that intention?
I think the Trump administration is going with what it has, which is a bunch of software companies who want to write software, who don't want to make the hardware. Now, whether the software solution, the so-called 6G idea, means you write code that will switch all the calls based on cheap generic computer components, as opposed to building dedicated ground relay stations and other technology that does the switching for you. That's what Huawei, as well as Ericsson and Nokia, do. Software companies want subsidies for software. And to some extent, I worry that this isn't so much rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic as stealing the silver from the Titanic dining room. They want subsidies. It's rent-seeking behavior from tech companies that don't like manufacturing but want to be paid to do software.
Sure, but the administration announced this week, for example, that Kodak was going to be pivoting and now manufacturing pharmaceuticals. The argument there is that this is about bringing the supply chain back from China, at least as it relates to medical equipment, pharmacology, PPE, and this is what the White House told us was it's just the first step, specifically looking at medical supply chain issues. Are you saying that they're not doing enough on when it comes to hardware and technology and reshoring those sort of companies?
That's precisely what I'm saying. I think the Trump administration has the right idea. They're talking the right talk, but the implementation is lagging. And as I said, if we can't produce computer chips, which are the building block of the digital economy, then our whole reshoring effort leaves a great deal to be desired. And we had a big move backwards in that, as I mentioned, when Intel said it's getting out of that business. To give you an idea of the difference between now and the Reagan era, when we created the digital economy, we spent about a point and a quarter of gross domestic product simply on federal subsidies for R&D, which went mainly to the great corporate laboratories. Now we spend less than half that amount relative to GDP, and all the great corporate laboratories are gone. As a matter of fact, Bell Labs, which used to be the best of them, produced many Nobel Prize winners. Its successor is now Shanghai Bell in Shanghai, owned by Nokia, which bought out the remaining Bell Labs assets. Nokia employs 16,000 Chinese researchers, and that's their center of R&D. So the amount of effort we'd have to put into this to break even with the Chinese, my guess is it's roughly $1 trillion over 10 years. It's an order of magnitude more than we're doing right now. Kudos to the Trump administration for the deal with Kodak. Kudos to them for identifying the problem, but we simply have not done enough.
And when it comes to coronavirus, so you mentioned that there was this phrase, we wrote about it here early on back in March, the phrase that the coronavirus is the Chernobyl moment for China. Walk our viewers through that, and do you agree with that assessment? Do you think that coronavirus really gives the United States an opening to change the game here?
I think coronavirus has, whether by intent or bad luck, given China an enormous advantage over the United States. We're still hitting records in terms of new cases in many states. The Chinese have virtually eliminated it. You can't trust the data, but even if the data were 10 or 100 times what the Chinese are reporting, they're way ahead of us. And the evidence is that the Chinese economy snapped back in the second quarter by every measure that we can see. And every analyst I know agrees with this assessment, whereas the United States economy had its worst decline in history during the second quarter, largely because of coronavirus lockdowns. Now, I talk to people in China on the ground. It's not a matter of relying on official data. To get into a restaurant or an office building in China, you have to show a green code on your smartphone and get scanned for temperature. The green code says that you've input your vital signs into your smartphone and sent them up to the cloud on a continuous basis, plus you've gotten a test. So not just China, but most of East Asia has crushed the virus and is in recovery mode, and
Well,
we're
and
still
and
lagging.
well, the Wall Street Journal reported about a research from Scientific American that said there's evidence that the strain of the coronavirus that was in Italy and here in the United States is far more virulent here compared to China. Have you heard that reporting, and do you think there might be something deliberate here in terms of how viral the strain is that was in Asia compared to the United States or to the West?
Well, virology is not my area, Carrie. I'm an economist, and I really can't evaluate the research. You get conflicting reports. My point is that whatever the origin of the virus was, accident, intent, or whatever, the result, as the dust settles, China is coming out of the dive much faster than we are. We're still declining, and this will give China considerable advantages. China is a big beneficiary, by the way. Chinese exports to the United States during the first half of the year are up year on year, despite the fact that personal consumption is down by a huge amount, roughly 10% year on year. That's because we're buying a lot more computers and smartphones and other electronics, like what we're using now to do a Zoom conversation, and we can only get them from China.
And in terms of making changes here and the numbers that you're seeking in terms of budget and government research, we did an interview this week with Senator Ted Cruz, and he said that China is engaging in what he called a 1,000-year war toward global dominance. And he even mentioned the analogy that you've written about, which is the comparison with the United States during the Cold War. So I'm wondering, have you spoken with Senator Cruz, and what overall is your read on Congress and whether Congress understands your arguments here?
I haven't spoken with Senator Cruz lately. I was one of the advisors on his foreign policy team during his 2016 campaign. I have a very high opinion of Senator Cruz, but I think he mischaracterized China in one very important respect. He says they're a new Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, during the Cold War, was spending, something like 25% of GDP on defense. It was starving its population. People waited for hours to buy a desiccated sausage in a company store while they put vast amounts of money into weapons. The Chinese have managed to get guns and butter at the same time. The Chinese playbook is not to emulate the Soviet Union in the 1980s, it's to emulate the United States in the 1980s. They want to play our winning hand in the Cold War by funding dual use technologies, which both build up their military, but also have civilian productivity spinoffs. That's how we made the Reagan defense buildup more than pay for itself, and that's what China's trying to do.
So, and one of the arguments in your book is that you say that everything you've heard about China is wrong or not right enough, and however bad you think things are, they're a lot worse. What are sort of the biggest takeaways for our viewers, real quick? What is the worst things that people are not aware of?
The United States government has warned that Huawei, if they control 5G networks, could steal a great deal of data. Huawei disputes that. I tend to believe our government more than Huawei. But when I interviewed the chief technology officer of Huawei, he said, we don't need to steal data because our plan is to get everyone to give us their data for free. For example, in China, the government has digitized almost everyone's health records and sequenced almost everybody's DNA, and they can take their vital signs on a daily basis through smartphone attachments. Huawei produces a smartphone that takes your temperature as you look at it, and pretty soon it'll be a blood oximeter, an electrocardiogram, and so forth. Huawei's plan is to link in 1 billion people outside China, putting in their vital signs daily, as well as their digitized medical records and their DNA, all of it going up to the cloud, controlled by Huawei servers, which means that the fuel that runs the artificial intelligence machine, this massive data, will be indispensable to every pharmaceutical company in the world that wants to test new drugs. So every European pharmaceutical company is in a joint venture with a Chinese company now because China has the data. And as this Huawei fellow told me, we don't want to run the world. We just want to run the control points. And the control points are the portage and storage of data. So
But
that's
when
frankly
we're and when but when
power.
you're looking at, I hear what you said about that you think the coronavirus has put China at a strategic advantage. Do you think it's also woken Europe up? You saw the UK pulling out of the Huawei deal. Do you think, in some respects, it's actually been a wake up call to not only Europeans but also to Americans to say, "Wow, I didn't realize how reliant I was. Wow, I didn't realize, as you've written, that this is a country that we perceived as a third world backwater is now in intense competition with us." Do you think that the coronavirus has actually been helpful for that?
China has bullied people and tried to use its control over medical supplies and other advantages to twist the arms of every country in the world that it can. It's a bully. It acts like an imperial aggressor. Nobody likes it, and a lot of people are reacting very strongly against it. But I wouldn't underestimate China's influence at this point because all the major European industrial companies, pharmaceutical companies, high tech companies, are increasing their presence in China because this massive investment in fourth industrial revolution technology and artificial intelligence and its applications really are the future for a lot of European companies. Volkswagen, biggest car manufacturer in the world, sells 40% of their vehicles in China. BMW and Mercedes hope that their electric vehicle business will be able to compete with Tesla because of their presence in China. And the same is true for the pharma guys and so forth. In the case of Britain, it's true Boris Johnson said that Huawei equipment would have to be turned out by 2027. That's 7 years from now. So we'll see if it actually happens. But he also allowed Huawei to build $1 billion research facility near Cambridge University, which will make Huawei the dominant force in telecom research in the United Kingdom, despite the fact that they proposed to ban the technology. So it's a very mixed picture so far. My view is if we said we are going to have American technological leadership, no matter what it costs, and we want our allies to back us up, they'd all come home wagging their tails behind them. They want us to do that. But as long as our response is sporadic and mainly rhetorical, everyone's going to hedge their bets between the United States and China. And that's what we see now.
Well, we are seeing pushback when it comes to accounting standards, for example, that the Chinese basically got exemptions and saying that they were a developing country, so therefore they didn't need to be held to the same standards. The Trump administration is vigorously spoken out against that. Do you think things are going in the right direction? Again, that there is some recognition of what you're saying, that this is not a third world country anymore and it needs to be held to the Western standards of rule of law, fair competition, et cetera.
Well, I think the Trump administration was absolutely right to raise these issues. However, the effect of this has been that a lot of Chinese companies listed in the United States who face the possibility of delisting have opened secondary offerings, initial public offerings in Hong Kong, with the result that perhaps $30 billion or $40 billion of capital has flowed into Hong Kong to buy those stocks. And the result is the strongest Hong Kong dollar we've seen in years. So for the time being, what we've done is to throw these Chinese companies back into Xi Jinping's briar patch, namely the Hong Kong market.
And how about you said you want to wake up the American people, but we hear Democrats, the White House last week said it was going to issue a veto threat of a Democratic proposal from the House on spending. So this is the typical spending bill. This isn't the coronavirus stimulus bill. It's the typical discretionary spending. And the proposal in the bill from the House Democrats would have required the United States to return its Peace Corps volunteers back to China because the Trump administration pulled the Peace Corps volunteers out of China, announced that that was happening this year because of this mindset. They said we need to stop perceiving them as a third world country because that's typically, what the Peace Corps is used
Right.
to help these poor developing countries. And they said
Yes.
we're changing our mindset. But you have Democrats who are now saying in their legislative proposals, no, we need to perpetually keep funding the Peace Corps in China. And the White House said there are other items in the bill that they said show a pro-China agenda here by Democrats. Do you agree with that? I mean, what's your
Oh,
read on it?
I think there's no question that there's a much more pro-China agenda among Democrats, and I think there's a very simple reason for that. Some of the biggest funders of the Democratic Party are the software companies. They all tend to be liberal, and they tend to be huge Democratic supporters as well as massive lobbyists. No one has made more money off China than the tech companies, who, as I said, like to write code, which has a high rate of return on equity, and allow China to be the producer of hardware for us, which has been a great deal for the Facebooks and Googles and Microsoft, but not a great deal for the United States of America, and surely not for the American middle class. You also have the financial sector. China, very cleverly, as part of the Phase 1 trade agreement with the United States, agreed to give a lot of concessions to American financial companies. So JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley now, for the first time, have 100% owned subsidiaries in China. BlackRock, our biggest money manager, is now managing money for Chinese in China. So the Chinese, in the process of assimilating us barbarians, are offering all kinds of prizes to people who are more conducive to their policy. So absolutely, the Democrats are heavily influenced by people who are making tons of money in China in a way that may not be good for the United States. And I have no doubt that a Biden administration would be much more amenable to the Chinese agenda than Trump has been.
So, in terms of getting these hardware companies or the hardware manufacturing back to the United States, let's say Apple, for example. Apple has lots of manufacturing that's happening in China right now. What's in the policy toolkit, and from a cost perspective, because that's obviously always the argument, and as an economist you understand the importance of low cost and production, and it ultimately benefits consumers because the products are
Sure.
cheaper. So what's the game plan to make consumer goods or just these hardware products still affordable, even
Well,
if they're here in the US?
that's exactly the right question, Carrie. Thank you for asking it. We've got a tilted pool table here. People don't like the term industrial policy. That stinks of the old social democratic government interventionism. I'm an old free market economist, an old supply sider, but we do have an industrial policy in the United States, and that industrial policy is China's. The Chinese, in fact, other Asians too, subsidize capital intensive manufacturing the way we subsidize sports stadiums and airports. And we're going to have to change our tax structure and perhaps do some direct subsidies to create an even playing field for American manufacturing. We need massive R&D tax breaks. We need faster depreciation. And in some cases where we've got strategically important industries like computer chips, we need to write checks to companies to keep production in the United States. This is because the Asians are doing it to us and have tilted the board, so all the manufacturing has, not all, but a vast amount of high-tech manufacturing has in fact shifted to Asia. And if we're going to bring it back, we need to create powerful incentives. We also need to create some disincentives. Companies that are not doing things that benefit the United States might face a higher tax rate. They might face antitrust action. The US government certainly has means at its disposal to create disincentives to doing the wrong thing, as well as incentives for doing the right things.
All right, David Goldman, I feel like we could keep going on for a while, but we're going to leave it right there and love to have you back. Make sure to check out the book, You Will Be Assimilated, China's Plan to Sinoform the World. David, thank you for joining us here on Just the News.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Pleasure.